from the Pentagon. DOD had tried to block Cooper from appearing for this deposition. The House Intel Committee issued a subpoena. She complied to testify. She had assumed responsibility for policy concerning Russia, Ukraine, Eurasia, and Western Balkans. But the scene was these House Republicans kind of storming in, causing a big scene on Capitol Hill today. Let's bring in our panel. Washington Post columnist Marc Thiessen, Marc Thiessen, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, Susan Ferriccio, chief congressional correspondent for the Washington Examiner, and Steve Hayes, editor of the Dispatch. All right, Susan, first to you. The scene today, kind of a little different up on Capitol Hill.
Right. Although I will argue the case here that there has been building discontent. I'm not sure Trump is really behind all this. Republicans have become increasingly frustrated with being shut out of the process. Today, you had a witness testify about spending security aid, an employee of the Defense Department, the Assistant Secretary, yet members of the Armed Services Committee were not allowed in there. In fact, they don't even have access to the transcripts in this instance. Now, this was a deposition, so the Democrats argue all depositions are handled this way. But the overarching argument against that is this is about the impeachment of the President of the United States. So if you pull back the scope a little bit and look at it and say, well, why shouldn't this be open to the press? Why shouldn't it be open to the public? That's the case Republicans are making today, and they've been getting increasingly upset about it as the weeks have gone on and witness after witness has come and gone from the Capitol without any of them hearing it.
What about that argument, Mark? Is that a powerful argument for Republicans to make? It's a process argument that is made in Washington, but there is substance that is being leaked out, but we're not really seeing the Q&A part of some of these depositions.
Well, Americans care about fairness, so if the process is not fair, then of course it's an effective argument. I mean, look, Swalwell was just quoted on your show saying that guilty people don't behave this way. People who are interested in an impartial investigation aimed at finding the truth don't behave the way the Democrats are doing. And just in that example, the room they were storming today was a SCIF, a secure compartmented facility that is designed for accepting classified information. Yet yesterday, Bill Taylor testified there, and his testimony was leaked as cell phone photographs of his testimony out of this secure compartmented facility. It's ridiculous. And on top of that, the Democrats criticized Donald Trump for putting the Zelensky transcript on a secure server that was reserved for highly classified information, yet they're using a secure compartmented facility to prevent people from being able to get access to the information that is being given in the depositions. It's total hypocrisy.
Which is unclassified, we should point out.
Yeah, it's not, which most of it is not classified. So why are they doing it in a SCIF? Have it in a hearing room.
Okay. Mara, the New York Times had a story. Ukraine knew of aid freeze by early August, undermining Trump defenses. In fact, the story says word of the aid freeze to the Ukrainians had gotten high-level Ukrainian officials by the first week in August, according to interviews and documents obtained by the New York Times. The problem was not a bureaucratic glitch. The Ukrainians were told then to address it. They were advised they should reach out to Mick Mulvaney, the acting White House chief of staff, according to the interviews and records. Well, here's Congressman John Radcliffe with Martha last night about testimony.
The mainstream media reporting that he provided evidence of a quid pro quo involving military aid is false. I questioned him directly on that, and neither he or any other witness has provided testimony that the Ukrainians were aware that military aid was being withheld. You can't have a quid pro quo with no quo.
You know, you would have to interview some Ukrainians, because we've gotten a whole bunch of different stories on the timeline here. We've heard in some of the text exchanges that the Ukrainians read about the hold on the aid from a story in Politico, and they got nervous. They reached out. What's happening? Here we're being told that they learned about it many weeks earlier. And this is something that probably has to be nailed down, because one of the defenses that the Republicans have offered is how can it be a quid pro quo if the Ukrainians didn't know that the aid was being held up. But, you know, one other point I want to make, there were Republicans inside that SCIF today, Republicans from the key committees. I mean, it's not like there were no Republicans. I'm not saying that they don't have a good argument that things should be more transparent and out in the public, but Republicans were not excluded from that deposition.
Yeah, it's just important to point out that we're talking the timeline. Even if you say the New York Times is completely accurate, it's still August after the After the July phone call.
After the call.
And then the aid does flow when it's supposed to flow in September. Okay, Steve, your thoughts on this story?
Yeah, look, I think it would be better for everybody if Democrats weren't handling this in such a partisan fashion. But that's not to say that Republicans haven't done similar things in the past. I remember when I was reporting extensively on Benghazi, there were meetings between senior Republican members of the House, including Speaker John Boehner, with the Benghazi whistleblowers at the time. I thought those meetings were necessary because the Benghazi whistleblowers were being thwarted at the CIA and trying to report up through those channels. It was important that those meetings took place, and I think a lot of good. We learned a lot more about what happened at Benghazi because they were eventually heard. Similar things happened with the Benghazi Special Committee in terms of depositions and hearings that were done not in the public eye. If it were my choice, if I had to do it, I would say let's do this all out in the open. Let's make everybody aware of what's going on, and let's listen to this in real time. But it's understandable why the process wouldn't unfold that way for exactly the same reasons that Republicans were arguing just a few short years ago.
Exactly.
All right, quickly, the lynching focus and all of the talk about the president's tweet and the reaction to it. Take a listen.
What Donald Trump has said about lynching is despicable.
How dare he? How dare he? And yet again, it is an example of Donald Trump having no appreciation for the history of this nation.
Even if the president should be impeached, history is going to question whether or not this was just a partisan lynching.
I think that he has spoken for himself. I think that that's right for him to apologize.
History, Susan, also has videotape.
Well,
Joe Biden.
that's right. And I think both parties should remember C-SPAN's got a full archive. As soon as that comment was made, they started replaying video from 20 years ago. Members of the Congressional Black Caucus coming to the floor of the House and calling the impeachment proceeding against President Clinton a lynching.
And Mara, so what does this do to that whole moment?
I mean, look, I feel the same way about lynching as I do about calling people Nazis or comparing something, or concentration camps. Can we just leave some of those terms alone and go forward without them? That would be better.
Okay, sounds good. Next up, President Trump touts what he calls a permanent ceasefire between Turkey and the Syrian Kurds.